Part 76. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 751. Sister, I don't know if my sister is safe yet. Please sir, please go with me to find her. Bai Bingxing's eyes were full of a kind of prayer, and a hint of indifference flashed through his big, watery eyes. After Lin Yu saw Bai Bingxing like this, he couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Actually, you don't need to worry too much. I just gave your sister a talisman. If your sister really encounters any danger, she will naturally crush the talisman by then. Lin Yu just said so softly, and then gently rubbed Bai Bingxing's little head, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. After Bai Bingxing heard what Lin Yu said, his whole expression could not help but condense, and his big watery eyes stared straight at Lin Yu. Sir, are you telling the truth? At this time, Lin Yu gently rubbed Bai Bingxing's little head, and then nodded and smiled. That's natural, can I still lie to you? Bai Bingxing suddenly felt happy in his heart, and then his face was completely filled with joy. At this time, Lin Yu and Bai Bingxing finished their discussion and walked forward. After Bai Bingxing and Lin Yu walked forward for a while, they felt a faint aura. The indifferent aura wrapped around them bit by bit, making the two of them feel uncomfortable. His expressions could not help but sink. How is that possible? There seems to be something wrong with that aura. Then the next second they saw a man wearing a black robe with 3 bloody lotuses tattooed on his chest. He suddenly appeared in front of them. The man stared at him with a smile on his face. Lin Yu stopped, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. I guess you must be looking for this woman now. The man looked up and down Lin Yu's body, with a look of amusement on the corners of his mouth, and a look of indifference on the corners of his eyes and brows. Although Lin Yu didn't recognize the man in front of him at this time, after Bai Bingxing, who was behind Lin Yu, saw this man, his face instantly became ugly. Venerable Blood Lotus. I didn't expect it to be you. In the darkness, not far from this temple fair, a man was followed by 2 people. The man gently rubbed his chin, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, which was quite affectionate. It's a bit playful. Interesting, now things start to get really interesting. After seeing this scene, Broken Arm Ah-san and Tang Dao Awu couldn't help but look at each other, and then they looked up and down at Bai Lian Zoshi. Lord Messenger, from my point of view, the current situation does not seem to require the dispatch of Lord Blood Lotus. Although that boy is not weak, I saw his battle just now, and it seems that he is not that strong. At this time, the broken-armed Ah-san said in a deep voice. Bai Lian Zuo heard the broken arm. After Ah-san said this, his whole expression suddenly sank, and then he gently touched his chin. What you said is indeed true, but judging from the current situation, some things may be really difficult to do. Bai Lian Zoshi said helplessly, and then his expression slowly began to become serious. A bit of solemnity flashed across his face, and the corners of his eyes and eyebrows were completely clear. It's a gloomy color. But just between exhalations and inhalations, I finally saw a huge cloud in the sky, and it unfolded. The violent and ferocious aura exploded almost at that moment, letting everyone his mind couldn't help but start to tremble slightly. After Bai Lian Zuo saw the cloud that exploded, his whole face was filled with excitement, and the smile on his lips began to become more and more obvious. Ha ha ha, it seems like they should have started fighting now. This time it's the best. At this time, Lin Yu and the Lord Blood Lotus stood opposite each other. His eyes were fixed on the Lord Blood Lotus. His whole expression was full of indifference, and then he suddenly took a step forward, and the decisive killing energy in his body was completely released at that moment. Before I get completely angry, I advise you to put that woman down obediently. If not, I will make sure you die this time. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the Lord Blood Lotus in front of him, and his whole expression was filled with a surging murderous aura. After seeing Lin Yu like this, Lord Blood Lotus couldn't help laughing. Ha ha ha, you made me die without a doubt. Today I want to see how capable you little guy is, and you can make me die without a doubt. I really don't believe it today. The Blood Lotus Lord's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and he glanced up and down at Lin Yu. His whole expression was full of indifference. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu was furious. The murderous aura on his body spread out, and instantly surrounded the Blood Lotus Venerable. The Snow Lotus Venerable seemed to feel the murderous intent around him, but his face was full of indifference. Ha ha ha, little guy, if you want to kill me now, you have to consider whether you have the ability to do so. I will stand here today and see how you can do it. After the Blood Lotus Venerable finished speaking, he slowly grabbed Bai Binjai's neck and lifted Bai Binjai up little by little. At this time, after seeing this scene, Lin Yu felt furious. At this moment, his anger was surging and blood was spilled across the sky. The vigorous momentum on his body was completely revealed in just one breath. Then he saw a fiery murderous intent spreading and surging. In the end, a turbid aura suddenly emerged from the formation and came towards everyone from all directions. That aura was extremely terrifying. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 752. But just in the blink of an eye, a figure suddenly appeared in front of everyone, and then he saw a bit of indifference flashing through that person's expression, and a monstrous murderous intention. From here it begins, completely diffused. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he let out a hysterical roar, and the murderous aura in his body began to snake out. Asshole, how dare you do this? Lin Yu was furious. I know you are here for me this time, but it doesn't matter if you are here for me. These people are innocent. How about you let them go? The killing energy in Lin Yu's body was completely released at this moment, and the angry scene suddenly became so winding. Almost at that moment, a figure came directly in front of Lin Yu. Finally, the next second, the figure had a dagger in his hand, pointing towards Lin Yu's back, and began to stab Lin Yu suddenly. Down. I don't know why Lin Yu just felt that he was in a trance at this time. At this time, he seemed to want to dodge, but before he could dodge, the figure's dagger seemed to be about to pierce him. In the back of my mind. But just after this moment, a turbid aura gradually began to be released from Lin Yu's body, and then the meandering aura made everyone's minds gradually tremble. The breath on the dagger forced Lin Yu to retreat one after another. At this time, Lin Yu saw a figure that looked exactly like Lord Blood Lotus, but was just a shadow transformed by a mass of black energy, standing behind him. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then forcibly calmed down his mood. There was quite a bit of silence in his expression. What's going on? What's going on? What do you want to do? The murderous aura on Lin Yu began to gradually spread out, and then he saw the Blood Lotus Lord just waved his hand, and the last black shadow disappeared in front of Lin Yu in an instant, as if it has never been normal. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face began to look a little ugly. At this time, he took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. No, in this formation, you seem to be able to absorb the power of the people in this formation for your own use. This is the evil sacrificial method in ancient times. In fact, this is not a formation, but one built by you. Altar. Lin Yu raised his head and glanced coldly at the Blood Lotus Venerable. His body was filled with an indifferent murderous aura, and his face was filled with a coldness. After the Lord Blood Lotus saw Lin Yu like this, he immediately laughed outright. He seemed to be completely crazy. His expression when he looked at Lin Yu was full of indifference. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect you to actually know this. But what can you do even if you know all this? Do you think you have any way to deal with it? Lin Yu's murderous aura was awe-inspiring, and then he suddenly moved forward and took a step forward. Is there any way? You'll know after you try it. The murderous aura on Lin Yu's body was overwhelming. After the Blood Lotus Master felt the murderous aura on Lin Yu's body, he began to panic slightly. He subconsciously took a few steps back and then stabilized his body. Ice Temple. It's not good. The eldest lady and the second lady seem to have been caught by the people of the White Lotus section. What should we do now? One of the people ran over quickly. The person's expression was a little panicked, and there was a sense of panic in the corners of his eyes and brows. At this moment, in the Ice Temple, a man with slightly gray hair just stood up and slapped the table. A bit of gloom flashed across the man's expression, and his aura was unreserved. Released. What? Who are the eldest young lady and the second young lady trapped by? You must tell me clearly today. At this time, a man wearing armor slowly walked forward. The man looked very handsome and tall, and looked quite heroic. At this moment, I saw the man kneeling down on the ground doting on the Lord of the Ice Temple, and then clasping his fists with his hands. To the Palace Master. The matter has come to this, and there is no point in complaining about others. I am willing to do my best for the Palace Master, and I sincerely ask the shopkeeper to agree. The man's eyes were fixed directly on the Master of the Ice Temple, with a hint of indifference flashing across his expression. The Master of the Ice Temple heard this. After the man said this, Master Yan couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Oh, those two little girls never asked me to worry about it. I really shouldn't care about them this time. After the Lord of the Ice Temple said this, a faint murderous aura emerged from his whole body, and that faint murderous aura spread. At this moment, everyone couldn't help but look at each other after seeing this scene. After a while, the Master of the Ice Temple couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Forget it, no matter how these two little girls should be rescued now, I order you to rescue them too as soon as possible. You can choose from all the elites in the Ice Temple. This time, you can only succeed, not fail. At this time, after Shen Mubai heard what the Lord of the Ice Temple said, a bit of joy flashed across his face, and then he nodded heavily. Thank you, Palace Master. This time, I will listen to the Palace Master. Shen Mubai said softly like this, with a faint smile on his lips, and a look of complete joy on his brows. And just after this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of them. After that figure came in front of them, his expression became a little more complicated. The Master of the Ice Temple glanced at Shen Mubai, and then at the man wearing a white robe. If you have something to say, just say it. The Ice Knight is not an outsider. At this time, Shen Mubai said leisurely, with a bit of indifference in his expression. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 753. At this time, the face of the white robe could not help but condense slightly, and then he said in a low voice, I just seemed to see the person guarding the eldest lady and the second lady through the mirror of time and space. The strength of that person, it's a bit scary, and we've never seen anyone as strong as that guy. At this time, Bai Peo said calmly. After the Ice Knight heard what the white robe said, his expression could not help but darken slightly, and then a hint of surprise flashed across his eyes and brows. Who is that person? Do you know now? At this time, after hearing what the Ice Knight said, Bai Peo couldn't help but shook his head slightly, and then his expression showed a bit of helplessness. Even now, I still haven't found out where that person came from. This shows that that guy is really scary. At this time, after the Master of the Ice Temple heard what Bai Peo said, his face began to become slightly ugly. At this time, he gently touched his chin. It's strange, it's really strange. We haven't found any information yet. It can be seen that this person is by no means an ordinary person, but we don't know what the purpose of this guy's approach to our ice temple is. Old Palace Master, back then you passed the ice temple to the young Palace Master, escaped far away, and brought us here thousands of miles away to create a new ice temple. I always feel that this matter is a bit unfair. Okay, I wonder what the old Palace Master thinks. An old man walked over slowly. The old man's hair and beard were all grey, and his face had ridges and grooves, but he looked kind-hearted. The old man was holding a cane in his hand. He slowly raised his head and looked at Bai Shenbing, the master of the ice temple, up and down. After Bai Shenbing heard the old man's voice, he quickly stood up, and then slowly walked towards the old man. At this moment, he saw that the white god soldier's face was a little more, a faint smile. Grandma Bingxiu, look at what you said. Didn't I want to protect those two little girls back then? There were so many people in the ice temple who were always against me, especially the third master, who regarded me as a thorn in their side and a thorn in their flesh. And I left the ice temple on my own and handed over the ice temple to the two little girls. Naturally, those two little girls couldn't be Lao San's tricks, and I also entrusted them to Lao San. It's safer for the two of them to be the third child's puppets. And the third child won't be stupid enough to let them die. At this time, Bai Shenbing said helplessly. The white robe and the ice knight have never met before, and the white god Bing said so many words in one breath. At this time, the white robe and the ice knight looked at each other in confusion. Bai Shenbing quickly waved his hand. What are you two waiting for? Are you waiting for me to send you out? At this time, the white robe and the ice knight hurriedly said goodbye and retreated. At this time, the two of them looked at each other with a somewhat complicated meaning in their eyes. The Bingxiu granny took a deep breath, and then glanced up and down towards Bai Shenbing. Then a sharp look flashed in her eyes, and a faint murderous intention aroused in her body. If you call my two granddaughters something wrong this time, I will never let you go. Granny Bingxiu's eyes were fixed on Bai Shenbing, and a faint murderous intent emerged from her body. The surging murderous intent began to quietly meander together, and a monstrous scene began to gradually meander. Come on. The next second, the powerful and vast aura filled everyone's hearts with a sense of fear. This time, Bai Shenbing finally felt the terrifying and murderous aura of Granny Bingxiu. At this time, Bai Shenbing's face couldn't help but turn slightly pale, and there was a clear look of fear in the corners of his eyes and brows, and then he subconsciously took a few steps back. Grandma Bingxiu, please calm down. It's very simple to make me calm down. If you just rescue my two precious granddaughters, then I won't be so angry. Granny Bingxiu said in a cold voice, and the blood-killing aura spread out from her body. The cold aura made everyone subconsciously take a few steps back. Barely able to keep his body steady. Bai Shenbing had never seen Granny Bingxiu so angry, so at this time, his face looked a little pale. Bai Shenbing took a few steps back, then lowered his voice and said softly, Mother-in-law, please calm down. Mother-in-law, please calm down. Just leave this matter to me. After all, she is also my daughter, I will definitely not let them die in the hands of the White Lotus sect. At this time, Bai Shenbing's face began to slowly turn pale, because the chill had spread into his bones. Bai Shenbing forcibly calmed down his mind, and then said leisurely. Granny Bingxiu nodded with satisfaction, and then waved her hand casually. Okay, since that's it, I don't need to say more, you just need to do as I say. After Grandma Bingxiu finished speaking, she walked out directly, leaving Bai Shenbing with her back. It was not until the ice and snow had been open for nearly a quarter of an hour that Bai Shenbing managed to stabilize her mind. At this time, Bai Binjiu seemed to be trapped in endless darkness. She only felt that she was falling rapidly in an endless abyss. The crazy feeling of falling made her face gradually become ugly. At this time, Venerable Blood Lotus seemed to have sensed the strangeness in Bai Binjio's mind at this moment. The corners of Venerable Blood Lotus's mouth even raised a few faint smiles, and a trace of ferocity flashed across his face. His expression was full of indifference. You actually want to take the opportunity to break free from my restraints. Don't you see whether you are worthy or not? At this time, the decisive killing aura on Venerable Blood Lotus was completely released in that instant, and the blood was surging. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 754. Lin Yu protected Bai Bingxing behind him, and then whispered to Bai Bingxing. Be careful and protect yourself. As for the rest, you don't have to worry about it. I'll do everything. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Bai Bingxing's expression flashed a trace of panic, and then he whispered to Lin Yu. What? Don't be so arrogant. If you really need it, I can help you. At this moment, Bai Bingxing whispered in Lin Yu's ear. Lin Yu heard it. After Bai Bingxing said this, a trace of indifference flashed across his expression, and his eyes were full of determination. It doesn't matter. I can handle this guy. You don't have to worry about it this time. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly stepped forward, and then released his decisive killing spirit completely at that moment. But it was just a breath, and then he saw that resolute killing aura swirling and entwining in the void, and then he saw it. Lin Yu's expression was indifferent, just like the master above the 9 heavens, dominating the world and the heroes looking down on the world. Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang never thought that Lin Yu was so terrible. At this time, Lin Yu's mind moved, and the Fire Kirin and the Red Refining Emperor Killing Beast were instantly revealed in front of him. After the Fire Kirin and the Red Refining Yellow Sand Beast appeared, even the black-robed man, who had been far away from the Fire Kirin and the Red Refining Yellow Sand Beast, couldn't help but become a little ugly. How is it possible? This is a legendary holy beast, which should have been extinct hundreds of billions of years ago. How can you subdue it? In fact, in essence, the Blood Lotus Venerable is just a lotus of a higher grade. The Blood Lotus Venerable said in a cold voice, with a look of indifference on his face. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu just gently stroked his chin, and then a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. What? Are you afraid? After hearing what Lin Yu said, the Blood Lotus Venerable couldn't help but laugh out loud, as if he was completely crazy, and a bit of indifference flashed in his eyes when he looked at Lin Yu. Ha ha ha, I'm afraid? How is it possible? I think you should be afraid. After the Blood Lotus Venerable finished speaking, the monstrous murderous aura began to gradually spread out a cold momentum, which almost completely enveloped Lin Yu in an instant. Then I saw that above the void, the original white lotus was like a bath in blood, and it gradually bloomed petals by petals. Lin Yu watched the people around him turn into blood one by one, and then he controlled the Fire Kirin and the Red Sand Beast to attack the lotus in the void. At this moment, the Blood Lotus Venerable seemed to be indifferent to everything in front of him. He just stood quietly by the side, gently groping his chin, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Interesting, it's really interesting. Do you really think you can handle it yourself? The Blood Lotus Venerable took a step forward, and then he pinched his hands. At this moment, he saw countless blood and energy gathered on the Blood Lotus. Then he looked around, and the surging feeling came out. The weird feeling of hanging made everyone's mind tremble gradually. The blood and energy penetrated into everyone's body. At this time, Lin Yu was calm. You two stop him from casting spells first, and I'll give him a fatal blow. This guy's mind should be all on that Blood Lotus now. At this time, Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang had already been stunned by the battle scene in front of them, and they didn't even notice that their blood was gradually losing. Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang looked at each other, and then they gritted their teeth. What this gentleman said is indeed true. It's too late now. It's better to show your true form. After Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang made up their minds, they jumped forward directly. At this moment, they saw two huge white tigers waving their scare at the Blood Lotus Venerable and suddenly slapping at him. After seeing this scene, the Blood Lotus Venerable couldn't help but flash a little surprise in his expression. Obviously, he didn't think that the descendants of the ancient beast White Tiger would appear in this place. Even after Lin Yu saw the two white tigers, his entire expression could not help but freeze. At this time, the white tiger that had been lying in Lin Yu's sea of consciousness seemed to be vaguely touched, and a faint low roar came out of its mouth. After Lin Yu heard the low roar of the white tiger, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead instantly, and he was speechless. Of course I know that this is your kind, but it may be a little difficult to get in touch with them now. Lin Yu just said helplessly, with a bit of helplessness flashing across his expression, and a bit of a wry smile on the corner of his mouth. I don't know why, but I always feel that these two guys seem to be my descendants, and they are very closely related. As for the reason, I don't know. At this time, Lin Yu heard it. After the white tiger said this, a strange feeling flashed across his expression, and then he took a deep breath. Alas, it's hard to put into words, it's hard to know. A churning blood energy burst out instantly in the void above the sky. That churning feeling made everyone's minds start to gradually tremble even at that moment. Stand up. The Blood Lotus Venerable didn't take Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang seriously at first, but after a moment, when he saw the two of them showing their true colors, his whole face became a little uncomfortable. And his expression could not help but sink. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 755. At this time, Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang rushed towards the Lord Blood Lotus. After seeing this scene, the Blood Lotus Venerable let out an angry roar, and then took a step towards the stationary tower in front, with a bloody aura surging in his body. How dare you, Shizi! The murderous aura on the Blood Lotus Venerable spread, and then he saw the Blood Lotus in the void. In an instant, he exuded a fierce blood energy and shot directly at Xiantian and Len Yunchang. Come! Just like this, a burst of blood energy completely penetrated Xiantian and Len Yunchang. Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang let out a scream, but even so, they still moved forward desperately and waved their claws heavily. That claw started to stab directly at Lord Blood Lotus's body so suddenly. After the Lord Blood Lotus saw this scene, his expression was full of indifference, and then he let out an angry roar. How dare you do this? At this time, the Venerable Snow Lotus suddenly flew forward without saying a word, and then jumped directly. However, in just one breath, he waved from the embroidered mouth without any hesitation. A bloody aura was released, and the bloody aura filled the air and could not be seen in the sky. Just the change in the scene in that area forced several people back. Lin Yu, who was in the distance, couldn't help but freeze after seeing this scene. His expression was filled with disbelief between his eyebrows. At this time, Lin Yu half squinted his eyes, a hint of indifference flashed across his expression, and there was a clear gloominess in the corners of his eyes and brows. Damn it, you dare to do this, you deserve to be killed. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he flew forward without saying a word and took a still step forward. Then he merged his sword energy into the red sand beast and the fire unicorn's flames. But that sword energy cut across the sky with each breath, and the person was forced to retreat one after another. Lin Yu stood with his sword in hand. There was quite a bit of indifference in his affection, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. I originally thought that you might have some abilities, but now it seems that you are nothing more than that. There is no need to say anything else about today. I just want you to die. After Lin Yu finished speaking, a sword in the cuff of his sleeve rose into the sky, but for just a moment, it went straight up to the sky, embracing the starry moon. At this time, the Lord Blood Lotus was completely torn apart by the Zhang Gangfeng, Kailan life, and the enveloping sword energy. Swaran looked quite embarrassed on the spot. After Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang saw this scene, they were shocked and dumbfounded. At this moment, the two of them looked at each other like this. You looked at me and I looked at you, and their expressions began to gradually become frightened. How is it possible? This sword energy is too terrifying, this. At this time, Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang were dissatisfied with Lin Yu before, but now they naturally did not dare to make any trouble against Lin Yu. At this time, the two of them looked at each other. And then immediately took several steps back, looking quite panicked. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he took a direct step forward, and finally gradually approached the two of them. A somewhat indifferent sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth, and a hint of sinister flashed through his expression. Ruthless. Now that they have been dealt with, it seems that you are the only ones left. Now I can give you a chance. Whether you want to be promoted or die, it is up to you to choose. After Lin Yu saw this scene, a hint of indifference flashed across his expression, and a sword energy appeared on the spot, high in the sky, making him invincible. At this moment, Lin Yu was standing in the air with one man and one sword. His whole face was filled with a look of indifference, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth became even more obvious. At this time, Duan Xiantian and Len Yunchang looked at each other, and then they looked at each other with a look of horror in the corners of their eyes and brows. It's true that the two of us did something wrong in the previous matter, so please don't blame me, sir, this time. This time it's a matter between the two of us. Sir, please calm down. Lin Yu heard this. After the two of them finished saying this, their expressions softened slightly. There was only a faint smile on the corners of their mouths, and then they suddenly took a step forward. The decisive killing energy in his body was released at that moment. Okay, after all, we were working together to fight against the enemy just now. Now that you have said it this time, I will never embarrass you. But if you dare to act like this again in the future, don't blame me for being unkind to you. You're welcome. Lin Yu's expression condensed, and then he waved his hand casually, and 3 sword energies were released from his long sword. Then, the snow lotus above the void was actually blown away by the 3 sword energies. The Tao sword energy was so completely shattered. At this time, Lin Yu hurriedly came to Bai Binjiu's side, and gently hugged Bai Binjiu. A look of concern flashed between his eyes and brows, and then he whispered like this. Asked. Are you okay? Bai Binjiu waved her hand quickly, and then shook her head. She looked weak, and a faint bitter smile appeared on her lips. At this moment, a terrifying and vast aura seemed to be gathering little by little, and then, the surroundings were torn apart by that man in an instant, and scattered in all directions. The man slowly stood up, with a look of indifference on his face, and the murderous aura on his body was completely released in that instant. Damn it, who is it? How dare you take back the holy object of my White Lotus Holy Church? Damn it, damn it, damn it. The man was like an angry leopard, desperately serving the whole person's tone, even a little hysterical, and his expression was full of indifference between his eyebrows. At this moment, a man slowly walked towards him. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 756. White Lotus Throne, I don't think your highness needs to be too angry about this matter. After all, some things are not difficult to deal with. The man just stared at the White Lotus throne with a smile on his face. The faint smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of playfulness on his face. After hearing what the man said, White Lotus Throne just turned his head and glanced up and down towards the man, and then said in a deep voice. What do you mean? Why can't I understand something? There seemed to be a slight hoarseness in White Lotus Throne's voice, but the sadness between his brows was naturally lingering. And the man wearing a black robe with 3 snow lotus flowers tattooed on his chest slowly walked towards White Lotus Wangzhou step by step, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. Nothing, just affects the mind of White Lotus Throne. After the White Lotus Throne saw this scene, his whole expression and behavior could not help but become slightly indifferent. He gently touched his chin, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Tell me, what insights do you have this time? At this time, the man in black robe turned his head towards the White Lotus Throne, just looked up and down, and then leaned over and whispered into the ear of the White Lotus Throne. At this time, after the White Lotus Throne heard what the black-robed man said, he couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then he forcibly calmed down his mind, with a bit of indifference in his expression. Then I saw his whole aura, and even started to tremble slightly. But you don't think this matter is too risky for me? If you insist on doing this, I'm afraid it's not worth it. The White Lotus Throne's eyes were staring straight at the man in black robes, his expression was completely indifferent, and the murderous aura in his body began to gradually be released. When the man in black robe heard what White Lotus Throne said, his brows became a little more calm, and his expression became a little colder. But Your Highness, there is not much time left for us now. As the saying goes, wealth and wealth seek weakness in danger. This time, if we don't fight hard, what will happen to us in the end? I think Your Highness doesn't need to say anything, it's natural for you to understand. At this moment, after the White Lotus Throne heard what the black-robed man said, his expression couldn't help but condense, and then he let out a long sigh. At this time, he was slightly panicked, and his expression suddenly changed. I couldn't help but feel a little helpless. What you said is indeed true. Wealth can be found in danger. Now we really have to fight for it? The White Lotus Throne stood up slowly at this moment, and then glanced towards the sky, his eyes full of depth. Then the White Lotus Throne waved his hand, and suddenly there was a mass in the chest of the man in black robe, which was grabbed by the White Lotus Throne. The black-robed man's expression was condensed, and his whole face couldn't help but look slightly ugly. He suddenly took several steps back, and then managed to stabilize his figure, which was regarded as reluctance. At this time, the White Lotus Throne gently touched his chin, and then put a smile on the black-robed man's body. There was more in his expression, a bit of playfulness, and the corners of his mouth were even more, it evoked a faint smile. I'm afraid you have found this thing a long time ago, right? But why don't you hand it over? At this time, the eyes of the White Lotus Throne were fixed on the black robe, and the indifferent sneer at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. A layer of dense cold sweat broke out on the forehead of the man in black robe, and then he immediately fell to his knees on the ground, with a look of complete panic on his face. I'm sorry, sir. This matter is all my subordinate's fault. Shuxia Li Ying, it's only right to hand this thing over to your majesty. The White Lotus Throne just waved his hand casually, and then snorted coldly, Humph, let's forget about this matter for now, but if there is a next time, I will definitely kill you. At this time, the White Lotus Throne poured his spiritual power into the blood essence of the god, and then he saw a stretching mountain range appearing in front of him, but as the mountain range went deeper, the scene changed. It stopped abruptly. After seeing this scene, White Lotus Throne's brows seemed to be knitted together. He took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood. Damn it, I didn't expect this map to be incomplete. Damn it. White Lotus Throne just took a deep breath, and then forcibly calmed down his mood, and the gloominess in his face was even more obvious. After experiencing this incident, Bai Binjiao became weaker and weaker. After everyone saw Bai Binjiao like this, the concern on their faces was naturally self-evident. Lin Yu gently touched his chin, but there was a lingering sadness on his face. At this time, he couldn't help but shake his head slightly. What should be done? What should be done? Lin Yu just let out a long sigh, with a look of helplessness on his face. At this moment, a person slowly walked in. That person was none other than Bai Bingxing. Lin Yu looked at the lingering melancholy between Bai Bingxing's eyebrows, and for a moment, the whole person couldn't help but panic. Why are you like this? Lin Yu's eyes looked up and down at Bai Bingxing, and then he forced a smile. At this time, Bai Bingxing looked at Bai Binjiu, and then sighed softly, alas, what else can it be because of it? It's not because of my sister, but what's wrong with my sister? Why is it like this? At this time, Bai Bingxing stared at Bai Binjiu, but the melancholy on his face was naturally beyond words, and the corners of his mouth even raised a faint bitter smile. At this time, Lin Yu's expression suddenly condensed, and then he heard a joyful voice in his mind. Congratulations to the host, you found a way. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Cheng. Chapter 757. After Lin Yu heard what Arya said, he was overjoyed, and there was a clear look of joy in the corners of his eyes and brows. At this time, Lin Yu's expression was full of excitement, and the corner of his mouth was even slightly smiling. As long as you find a way, what other options do you have now? At this time, Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at Arya, and the faint smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Arya just pondered for a moment, and then she waved her hand casually, and such a scene suddenly appeared in front of Lin Yu. Deep in the vast mountain, a spiritual snake with a single horn was entangled beside a medicinal herb with small red fruits. After Lin Yu saw this scene, his whole mind could not help but freeze, and the faint smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. Ha ha ha, if I guessed correctly, this should be red nut grass, but where does this red nut grass grow? 300 miles south from here, there is a forest called Baiko Forest, and there is red fruit grass there. Arya's voice suddenly sounded in Lin Yu's mind. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly spoke up. He seemed to have a lot of points now, but he just didn't know if he could use his points to redeem them. When Lin Yu thought of this, he asked softly, I remember that I still have a lot of points, but I don't know if my points can be redeemed for this red fruit grass. Arya heard Lin Yu, and after saying this, she looked embarrassed, and then she shook her head slightly. The system is being upgraded recently. Ordinary redemption tasks cannot be redeemed, especially herbs like this cannot be redeemed, so. At this time, Arya's eyes were fixed directly on Lin Yu, and a faint bitter smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. There was a complete helplessness between her eyebrows. When Lin Yu heard what Arya said, he understood what Arya meant in an instant. He just sighed softly, oh, there is no way. Since you have said so, then it is indeed very helpless. After Lin Yu thought of this, he came to his senses immediately. Then he glanced at Bai Bingxing, and then spoke softly. I have found a way to treat your sister, but I may need to leave for a while, so. When Bai Bingxing heard that Lin Yu had found his sister's method, he was naturally overjoyed, and then his eyes couldn't help but stare straight at Lin Yu, and the corners of his mouth were filled with laughter. It evoked a slight smile. Really? You can really save my sister? If that's the case, that would be great. Bai Bingxing's big, watery eyes stared directly at the corners of Lin Yu's mouth, and his faint smile became more and more obvious. After Lin Yu heard what Bai Bingxing said, he nodded slightly, and then he stretched out his hand and gently rubbed Bai Bingxing's little head, with a bit of doting in his eyes. It's just that you and your sister have to wait for me here first. I have to go to the herb forest to get a medicinal herb. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at Bai Bingxing, with a look of complete helplessness on his face. When Bai Bingxing heard Lin Yu say this, he gently touched his chin, pondered for a moment, and then nodded heavily. Of course there's nothing wrong with this. Go quickly and don't delay. Bai Bingxing stared at Lin Yu with a smile, and then the faint smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this moment, Bai Bingxing seemed to have remembered something, and turned his head to look at Lin Yu, with a hint of worry flashing across his face. It's just. When Lin Yu saw Bai Bingxing like this, his expression couldn't help but condense, and then he said softly, just what? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on Bai Bingxing, and then he glanced at Bai Bingxing. Bai Bingxing took a deep breath, and then said calmly, it's just that I want to enter that place, but it's easy to get out. I'm afraid it will be a little difficult. I'm just afraid that you will be in danger. Bai Bingxing's big, watery eyes stared straight at Lin Yu, and then he spoke softly. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Bai Bingxing said, his expression couldn't help but condense, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. Oh, this time it is really a headache, but I don't know what to do. A strange color flashed between Bai Bingxing's brows, and then, as if he had made up his mind, he took out a sachet from his pocket. At this time, Bai Bingxing's pretty face had a hint of crimson, and then he handed the sachet directly to Lin Yu. After seeing the sachet, Lin Yu just felt a little strange. He couldn't understand why this little girl gave him the sachet. At this time, Lin Yu turned his head and looked at Bai Bingxing up and down, and then said softly, what's the meaning of giving me the sachet? Lin Yu turned his head and stared at Bai Bingxing with his eyes, a little complicated flashed in his expression, and then he said leisurely. After Bai Bingxing heard what Lin Yu said, the blush on her pretty face began to become more and more obvious. If you want it, take it. If you don't want it, give it to me. Bai Bingxing rolled her eyes at Lin Yu in annoyance, and then said softly. At this time, Lin Yu heard Bai Bingxing say this, and at that time he couldn't help but waved and smiled. Ha ha ha, of course I have to take this, of course I have to take it. But the blush on Bai Bingxing's pretty face looked a little strange. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 758. At this time, Bai Bingxing's eyes would sneak towards Lin Yu from time to time and take a peek at the crimson color on her pretty face, which was very obvious. Although Lin Yu didn't know what kind of medicine this little girl was selling in her gourd, he also knew very well that he might not be able to delay it any longer now. If he continued to delay it, I'm afraid that by then the trouble will be even greater. So at this time, Lin Yu didn't hesitate at all, and others decided to leave. A bit of complexity flashed across Bai Bingxing's expression, and then he sent Lin Yu away. At this time, Bai Bingxing's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then he said softly, be careful, there are many caravans near the Baiko garden who specialize in finding rare herbs, those guys are even more terrifying. After Lin Yu heard what Bai Bingxing said, he couldn't help but rub Bai Bingxing's little head so gently. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and there was a kind of doting between his eyebrows. Don't worry, I understand what you're talking about, so there's no need to worry too much. After Bai Bingxing heard Lin Yu's affirmative reply, he nodded gently, but his expression still looked a bit hesitant. At this time, Lin Yu just felt that this little girl Bai Bingxing was real and very weird, and he had no idea what kind of medicine this little girl was selling in her gourd. After a while, Lin Yu walked out directly. At this time, the voice of the space-time beast suddenly sounded in Lin Yu's mind. Hee, I didn't expect that this kid like you is really pretty lucky. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. He just glared at the space-time beast angrily. What's going on? Don't look so mean, you guy. I even have the urge to slap you. At this time, the space-time beast heard Lin Yu. After saying this, he was speechless for a while, and his face was full of helplessness. If you say that, that's really too much. In fact, I just want to tell you, do you know that if a girl here gives you a sachet, it means that she is committed to you in this life. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his whole face was full of disbelief, and then he took a deep breath. How is that possible? Then if I accept it, does that mean I accept her will? At this time, Lin Yu's face clearly showed some helplessness, and the corner of his mouth evoked a somewhat indifferent wry smile. At this time, the space-time beast just coughed a few times, and then said softly and unhurriedly, "What you said is indeed half true, so now." At this time, the sky beast stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and then said quietly, "So now that you are injured, you have actually agreed to date me, at least that's what I think now." At this time, the space-time beast was staring at Lin Yu with a smile on his face. The faint smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and his expression was quite playful. Lin Yu heard the time and space beast. After saying this, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless for a while. He just coughed lightly, "Ahem, but I didn't know before, and now, the situation is that we will have to go back sooner or later." "What if we go back?" Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the empty hand at this moment, and then he said helplessly, and the bitter smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. After hearing Lin Yu's words, the space-time beast just pondered for a moment, and then gently rubbed his chin. "If you can go back, they may not be able to go back with you. What's more, these 2 people carry the blood of the ancient phoenix, so I think you should be able to understand the current situation." At this time, the space-time beast was just like this, staring at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and then he spoke softly and unhurriedly, and the playfulness in the corners of his eyes and brows became more and more obvious. When Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his face couldn't help but condense, and then he nodded lightly the next second. "I understand what you said. If this is the case, then I will do as you say." At this moment, after hearing Lin Yu's words, the time and space beast stopped talking. But after a moment, his face instantly became ugly, and his brows seemed to be knitted together. A bit of panic flashed across his expression. "Oops, I'm afraid there may be danger ahead. I think it's better for the 2 of us to be careful." After Lin Yu heard what the time and space beast said, he obviously didn't believe what the time and space beast said, because he didn't notice any danger ahead at all, so Lin Yu waved his hands and smiled like this. "This kind of joke is not easy to make at all, and it is not interesting at all. I didn't notice anything wrong in the atmosphere before." Lin Yu might be a little arrogant. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast looked helpless, and then shook his head. "If you don't believe me, you will regret it." The space-time beast turned around and stared at Lin Yu with a firm look. Even Lin Yu had to admit that the space-time beast had never been so serious before, so Lin Yu was slightly stunned at this time. "What happened? Come and tell me in detail." Lin Yu turned around and stared at the space-time beast, and then said leisurely. The space-time beast just took a deep breath, and then glanced coldly at the front, and shouted in a deep voice, "Can those guys in front have no intention of coming out now?" The voice of the space-time beast suddenly rang in their ears. "You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 759. Then they saw a few people, who slowly appeared in front of them. Those people stared at Lin Yu in front of them, which seemed a little strange, because they still didn't think that the young man in front of them could make such a sound. The same intimidating voice from before. "Boy, I don't need to say anything else for the moment. I just want to ask you if you have the money to buy a road or not. If you don't have the money to buy a road, you are probably going to die today. We are telling you." A man with dyed yellow hair walked out slowly holding a dagger. The people behind him also approached Lin Yu step by step. Although those people looked like nothing more than he just looks like a little guy. But if those guys really put their strength together, I'm afraid everyone would be a master in the realm of gods. When Lin Yu saw this scene, he was naturally startled and shocked for a while. At this time, he had a look of disbelief in the corners of his eyes and brows. How is it possible? How could these guys be all masters of the god realm at this time? This is a bit too unbelievable. At this time, Lin Yu was speaking softly, with a look of complete indifference on his face, and a look of disbelief on the corners of his eyes and brows. A mysterious force began to approach Lin Yu bit by bit. That terrifying force swept Lin Yu completely in an instant. After realizing their power, the space-time beast only had a faint sneer on his lips. It doesn't matter. Now I can completely lend you my power. It should be enough to deal with these boys. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his whole face couldn't help but condense, and then he said softly. But considering your current situation, can you really deal with them? Lin Yu's eyes flashed with suspicion. After the time and space beast heard what Lin Yu said, a bit of indifference flashed in its expression, and then it became so beautiful that it was so angry that it said coldly to Lin Yu. Although these guys are all masters of the god realm, their foundations are not stable. Although they are talented, their strength is only average. So if I were to deal with them, it would be easy and effortless. Lin Yu heard the time and space beast. After saying this, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then he nodded with satisfaction, and there was a bit of killing intent in his body. A bloody aura gradually gathered at that moment. Okay, I haven't used your power for such a long time, now it's time to show off your power. After Lin Yu finished speaking, the faint murderous intent in his body was completely revealed at that moment, and the monstrous scene cut across the sky at that moment, stretching 3,000 miles away. Finally, they looked at the space-time beast, and suddenly appeared in front of them. At this time, the space-time beast transformed into a human form. Even Lin Yu couldn't help but feel a bit handsome when he saw the time and space beast transformed into a human form. The space-time beast suddenly took a step forward, and then slowly moved towards those guys, gradually approaching the corner of its mouth. The indifferent sneer became more and more obvious, and there was a clear expression on its face. It showed some bloody murderous intent. Interesting, I didn't expect that you would dare to stop me. Today I will let you know what the price is. The space-time beast flew forward and took a step forward, and then completely released the murderous aura in his body without any reservation. The overwhelming murderous intent filled the surrounding area, and instantly then he wrapped up those poor guys. Those few people had never imagined that Lin Yu would have such a powerful master of the space-time beast beside him. They originally thought that Lin Yu was just an ordinary person, and they wanted to pull Lin Yu out and tease him a little, but now I don't want to make things self-defeating. Now it's them who become the joke. All the people looked at each other with a kind of disbelief in the corners of their eyes and brows. They kept moving towards the back and retreated tremblingly. Sir, this. At this moment, the space-time beast just waved his hand, and then the gloomy killing aura instantly appeared in his cuffs, quietly gathering here. That killing energy stretched across the sky, but just that momentary scene made everyone's hearts freeze. At this time, the corners of the space-time beast's mouth only evoked a faint smile, and the corners of its eyes and brows were full of amusement. How about it? Today you should know how useless you are. Those people naturally did not dare to have a real head-on confrontation with the space-time beast, so at this time they were moving towards it like this crazily. Why did they take a few steps back and look at the space-time beast with a kind of fear in their eyes? I know, please forgive me, please forgive me. At this time, the space-time beast seemed to have discovered that there seemed to be a piece of blood essence on these people. That piece of blood essence seemed to be able to activate the bloodline of the space-time beast, and even Lin Yu seemed to be able to vaguely detect the lingering faint aura on their bodies. After Lin Yu noticed this aura of indifference, his whole expression could not help but condense, and then he gently rubbed his chin. Strange, what's going on with that piece of blood essence? Why can even I be attracted to it? Lin Yu half squinted his eyes, and a bit of confusion naturally flashed across the corners of his eyes and brows, and his brows were full of surprise. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the space-time beast just pondered for a moment, and then smiled softly like this. It's very simple, because that piece of blood crystal seems to hide a huge secret. When I was in the White Lotus sect, I once accidentally saw such a piece of blood crystal in the hand of the leader. The space-time beast just said this leisurely, with a bit of complexity flashing across his expression, and a bit of indifference flashing between his eyebrows. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his expression couldn't help but froze slightly, and a bit of a smile appeared on his face. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 760. And at this moment, a faint blood energy lingered in it, and that faint blood energy began to quietly condense in it at that moment. The space-time beast just glanced up and down at the yellow-haired man surrounding it, and then hooked his hand. The yellow-haired man was directly pushed in front of the space-time beast by this space. At this time, the space-time beast turned his head and looked up and down at Huang Mao. A bit of indifference flashed across his expression, and a bit of bloody aura emerged between his eyebrows. Let me ask you, where did you get that blood essence? At this time, after Huang Mao heard what the space-time beast said, a dense layer of cold sweat broke out on her forehead. At this time, her voice even trembled slightly when she spoke. This. The yellow-haired man spoke tremblingly for a long time without saying a word. At this time, after seeing this scene, the space beast's expression was full of murderous intent. What is this? Come to me truthfully. If not, you should know what will happen to you. After a moment, a prehistoric energy came quietly. Above that suspended power, above the 9 heavens, down to the stars and the moon, it was just a breath and a breath, but it was just a moment. It forced everyone to retreat at that moment. After about half a while, the space-time beast couldn't help but take a few steps back, and then managed to stabilize his body. He only felt a surge of energy in his chest. His face couldn't help but become slightly ugly. And just after this moment, the mysterious energy had a strange power, and it shot straight to the sky gate, and then I saw the shape of a person completely composed of black shadows, which suddenly began to gradually appear. Come out. The man gently rubbed his chin, with a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. There was quite a bit of indifference in his expression, and he looked down at Lin Yu from a high position. Little guy, I originally thought you had some ability, but now it seems that you are nothing more than that. I will give you a chance today. If you obediently hand over the blood crystal you just snatched to me, then this time I can spare your life. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the man in black robe said, the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious, and his eyes were fixed on the man in black robe. His expression, a bit of indifference flashed through him. Really? Spare my life? You are really powerful. I really don't believe you today that you can be so capable. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward without saying anything. Finally, he came directly in front of the man, and then he saw the sword in his hand, pointing directly at the man. His chest was stabbed here. At this time, the aura composed of the black shadow just took a few steps back in time, and it could be regarded as barely stabilizing its figure. But in just that brief moment, Lin Yubian saw the black figure taking nearly 5 steps back before barely holding on to his position. After Lin Yu saw this scene, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then he gradually approached the guy step by step, and the playful color in his eyebrows began to become more and more obvious. Interesting, I didn't expect you to be so stupid. I really saw it today. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he waved his hand casually, and then he saw a lingering aura, rising straight into the sky. The mysterious aura was moving up and down, but it was just a matter of exhaling and inhaling. In an instant, everyone felt an unprecedented sense of oppression. Lin Yu felt as if the space around him had fallen into chaos for a while. And that aura seemed to be all-pervasive, as if it wanted to kill Lin Yu completely, and it crazily penetrated into Lin Yu's body. But just after this moment, the aura seemed to realize that something was wrong with this matter, because he suddenly discovered that Lin Yu seemed to have this unprecedented secret hidden in his body. "Brother," a ball of black energy said coldly. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the man in black robe said, his whole expression couldn't help but become so condensed. There was a look of disbelief in the corners of his eyes and brows, and then they communicated secretly. He picked up the space-time beast and said softly, "Are you this guy's brother?" The space-time beast heard Lin Yu and couldn't help but sigh softly after saying this. After a moment, he shook his head helplessly. There was quite a bit of indifference in his expression, and the corners of his mouth were even more raised. A bit of a wry smile. "Oh, I didn't expect that the person who came to intercept this time was actually him. Anyway, he has already noticed it. There is no point in hiding it again. It is better to expose the identity directly." After the time and space beast finished speaking, he suddenly waved his hand, and then a tyrannical force suddenly came out of the body of the time and space beast. That violent and fierce power made everyone people's expressions couldn't help but condense. But just a moment later, the mysterious aura condensed together in an instant, and then looked at the indifferent true chi around, which made everyone tremble. At this time, the space-time beast had a rather indifferent look. And the aura that had been wrapped in the rain before also gradually revealed its shape in front of the space-time beast. He looked at the space-time beast with a smile on his face, and his expression was even more indifferent. "I didn't expect it was really you." After seeing this scene, the yellow-haired man not far away was stunned. At this time, he was afraid that he knew that he was probably in trouble this time, so he wanted to sneak away. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly flew forward, and then took a step directly to the side of the guy, looking at the yellow-haired man with a smile on his face, and the sense of oppression on his body was naturally self-evident. After seeing this scene, the yellow-haired man subconsciously took a few steps back.